Welcome back, everybody. This is Parker Hurley talking about the NFL. Yesterday, I talked about the Las Vegas Raiders, went through their offseason preview, their season review. So today, I'm going to go through the number 2 overall pick with the New York Jets, what I did yesterday. I wrote these articles highlighting 5 questions. I wrote them, this one was published on April 29th. So I wrote articles way back in April asking questions about the upcoming season. And now we're going to go like 9 months later and see 8 months later and see what the answers were to my questions and whether they were crazy or not. And then we're going to go through the roster and come up with 5 new questions. And then hopefully right after the draft or right before the draft, we'll see. But hopefully right after the draft, I will go through these questions and see if the Jets answer them properly. So first off, for the Jets, my first question was, can Justin Fields put it together? I said that his last 2 stops, he didn't earn his contract, but the Jets must have saw something different. They came from Detroit, so the game plan for Fields often. Did they see something that Pittsburgh and Chicago didn't? And the answer is no, they were wrong on Justin Fields. He was really bad this season. He was worse from adjusted net yards per attempt, and he got hurt more with the Jets than he did in his last season with the Chicago Bears and with his only season with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So an overall disappointing season. We will get into some of this with the roster stuff, but his contract is going to be tough to move. First off, the dead salary, it's hard to cut him without there's no relief to it, so it makes no sense to cut him. It's going to be hard to trade him because any team trading him is either going to need to take on his salary or trade you enough, cost that it feels good to get rid of him despite eating all of his salary. So it feels like Justin Fields is going to have to be either the backup or competing to start again this season, which ends up kind of becoming one of my new questions here is, what are they going to do with Fields? Because at quarterback, they're going to pick number 2. So they're not going to take the top guy. We think that's going to go to the Las Vegas Raiders. Their roster's in a pretty tough spot. They, have a new GM coming in. They have a lot of roster turnover, everything like that. It was his first season last year. Do they go for the long-term rebuild and maybe even Fields is competing with somebody cheap next season because he's getting 20-something million dollars on the salary cap? Or do they draft somebody and say that it's not a big deal because the rookie salary is so low that they can eat Justin Fields' salary for that first season? So that'll be something interesting that they do. My second question was, can the defensive line create enough juice? I said Will McDonald is not a run stopper. He's only a pass rusher. I said that Jermaine Johnson's coming off of a serious injury, and I said their interior defensive line has Quinnen Williams and a bunch of nobodies, and I thought that concerned me for the Jets. Turned out I was mostly correct. I think I'm 2 for 2 on these for the Jets. Will McDonald went from 10.5 sacks to 8. Still a pretty good pass rusher, but has not progressed as a run defender. And it makes him hard to play every single down, which the Jets are trying to do because they don't have enough depth on their defensive line. Jermaine Johnson came back from the Achilles injury, only posted 3 sacks, had a really disappointing season. We'll talk about those 2 a little bit later. They ended up trading for Harrison Phillips after I wrote this article because I talked about how bad their interior is, but Harrison Phillips didn't fix the issue, and they ended up trading Quinnen Williams because of how bad they started this season. So their interior defensive line actually ended up being worse than I thought it was going to be, which is kind of hard considering I thought it was going to be pretty bad. So that's where they stand, and we'll talk about that in a second here. So my third question was, who's going to start opposite of Sauce Gardner? I said it'll probably be Brandon Stevens to start the year, but they would love by the end of the year for A.Z. Thomas to step into the role across from Sauce Gardner, and maybe next year they go forward with A.Z. and Sauce. I obviously said that before they traded Sauce Gardner. They traded Sauce like halfway through this season, so didn't see that one coming, but when the Jets started as poorly as they did. And what's funny is that it went how I expected. A.Z. Thomas was on the sidelines to start the season behind Brandon Stevens. But instead of them slowly moving Stevens to the side, they traded Sauce Gardner. It bought time for Thomas to start, but then Thomas got hurt. So now they're heading into the offseason with, Stevens is sort of on that like replaceable level line, a little bit slightly better than average. you could replace him, but with the Jets and how many holes they have, they're probably going to bring Stevens back. And then AZ Thomas will probably be the guy next to him. I don't know if you've seen enough from him in his rookie season, but I think given, like I said, their needs and resources, they're going to have to bank on him taking a step next season. They also traded for Jarvis Brown-Lee, who's probably going to be back next season, although I assume he'll start in the slot because Jazeer Taylor, they also traded for from the Chargers, but he's a free agent, and it seems like they like Brown-Lee more than Jazeer Taylor. So my third question, kind of surprised by the Sauce Gardner trade, obviously. Fourth question, are they asking way too much from Mason Taylor? The answer was obviously yes. I just talked about how Mason Taylor is not an NFL-ready tight end, and I think his upside is still immensely high. But I said if he has a disappointing rookie season, even though he's going to be one of their highest, and I think so many people said, who else on the Jets can catch passes? They drafted him, second round in the 30s overall. How exciting. Son of an NFL player. He can hit the ground running, and he can lead the Jets in targets, catches, everything like that. He actually did lead the Jets in targets, but Garrett Wilson unfortunately led the Jets in yards. Not unfortunately for Wilson, but unfortunately he missed 9 games and still led the Jets in yards. And that's because they were leaning on a guy like Mason Taylor far too much. Taylor ended up getting hurt to miss the end of the season. They're going to go into next season expecting similar from him, obviously. But I think taking the growing pains and the lumps is probably good for him. Like I said, with some of these guys, when they don't produce early in their careers, I would be disappointed. But with Taylor, I think it was asking a lot for him to have any sort of good season. I thought there was a chance he would lead it in targets, and he did. And I thought there was a chance maybe he won't lead it in yards, and he did. So I think that's about setting up right. And then my fifth question was, who could emerge behind Garrett Wilson as the Jets' top receivers? And basically, I just answered it there that nobody really could, especially when I wrote this in April. I was talking about guys like Malachi Corley and Alan Lazard, Josh Reynolds, turned out to be Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie, 2 guys they got in trades. So really, and like I said, Garrett Wilson still led the team in receiving despite missing all that time because their 2 receivers, best receivers down the stretch, they did not acquire them until the trade deadline. So that essentially tells you what the Jets were. And I think pretty spot on with my questions and what I thought might happen to the Jets based on how their offseason was setting up. It seems like I kind of, none of those things were too surprising other than obviously the Sauce Gardner trade. And then some of those other acquisitions, like them getting Adonai Mitchell, them getting a couple cornerbacks, them getting Harrison Phillips, them trading Quinnen Williams. That all was obviously unexpected. The rest, I think the outcomes on the field were expected. So quarterback, huge question. Like I said, I already talked about it. They're going to bring back Fields. They're going to have to. Tyrod Taylor's gone. Do they run it back? Do they bring back a similar style quarterback? The thing that I thought was so interesting is that I thought when they were coming from Detroit, they were going to say, okay, we're going to run Fields into the ground and have a really running forward offense, and they ran Fields a lot less than he did in Chicago. So do they want more of a pocket passer? Is that what this offense is gearing towards since they're bringing the coaching staff back? Running back is going to be one of my questions. Breece Hall wants to leave, so they're not bringing back Breece Hall. He won't re-sign there. Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, it's a question of, are they comfortable with those 2? They seem comfortable, with those 2 mixing in as like a 3-headed thing when Breece Hall's there. But now that they don't have a big name like Breece Hall, do they go out and get somebody? Like I said, assets aren't heavy. They need a quarterback. They need multiple wide receivers, which does bring me to my next one with, what do they think of Adonai Mitchell? He averaged 1.2 yards per route run with the Jets this season. He was obviously their best producer when they traded for him, but it still wasn't very productive. But he was playing with Brady Cook for the majority of those games, and they were pretty clearly tanking. So, Garrett Wilson will be healthy next season. Do they think Adonai Mitchell is a part of this? And then they just need one more receiver, or really, if they don't think Adonai Mitchell's a guy, they probably need like 2 receivers. So it's going to be interesting to see what they think of Mitchell. He obviously has a couple years left on his deal. They're going to run it back with Jeremy Rucker. They just extended him, and Mason Taylor. So tight end, I don't think I have any questions. I'll have some questions in their interior offensive line. Their tackles are set. One of the biggest bright spots of the Jets is that they have a left tackle and a right tackle that are young and cost-controlled in Membu and Fashanu, and both of them look pretty talented right now. They also, Josh Myers looks pretty settled in at center, and Joe Tittman came in for an injured Elijah Vera Tucker and ended up playing right guard. And I think they're going to be okay with that. So Elijah Vera Tucker and John Simpson. Vera Tucker, who got hurt, can play multiple positions, is young. I don't think he's going to re-sign with the Jets. Another guy that I think is going to get some pretty good money on the free agency market, especially as long as his health concerns don't become an issue. So Vera Tucker is going to be gone. My question with him is how much money does he make? And my question with them is, do they bring back John Simpson? And then they would pretty much have, because Vera Tucker missed so much time, they would have all 5 of their offensive linemen from last season and bring it back. With a Jets team that is having so much change and potentially a new quarterback and a lot of different pieces, it would be really nice to have all 5 offensive linemen back. But I understand that Simpson is probably pricing himself out of their market, and the fact that if he wants to play for a contender, he may want to choose to do that as well. Like I said, another big question I have is, what do they do with Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson? Will McDonald has a 5th-year option here that it doesn't seem like they're interested in picking up. And then Jermaine Johnson is going to be a free agent at the end of this season. So it seems like both of them are going to enter the final year of their contract this summer. And if you're the Jets, like I keep saying, you need more assets. You have a lot of holes. If you don't see Johnson and McDonald as long-term pieces, why wouldn't you trade both of them? The issue with Johnson is he's coming off of a low point. His value is very low. He's a free agent at the end of the season. He's coming off an Achilles injury, and when he did come back from the Achilles, he looked slower. So he's not going to draw much. But if you're the Jets, he's a former first-round pick, and you would like to get something from him before he just leaves in free agency. Same with Will McDonald. At least he has 18.5 sacks in the last 2 years. So maybe you just try and trade him while the iron's hot. But then obviously they're bone dry at edge rusher beyond that. So what do they do there? Harrison Phillips, another guy who he has 1 year left on his deal, but he's like 30, so I don't think you extend him. They traded for Mazzie Smith. He hasn't done anything, has barely even been active. Interior defensive line's a huge need, a huge issue for them. They're going to need to do something there. Quincy Williams is a free agent. He's another one that, does he even want to come back? They changed defenses on him. He was signed by Saleh and fit better with Saleh. Is he, interested in even playing for this team? They have Jamie and Sherwood signed. Don't see them cutting him because of all the issues elsewhere. And then, like I said, I think AZ Thomas, Brandon Stevens, Jarvis Brown-Lee, you have 3 cornerbacks, so that's good. And then all their safeties, Tony Adams and Andre Cisco, both ended the season on the IR, and both are free agents. And I don't know if either of them, if you're the Jets, both of them had such poor seasons. And like I said, with the shift in schemes, I don't know if you're even interested in bringing them back. They did have the rookie from Alabama, Malachi Moore, looked pretty good. So I think 4/5 of your secondary, if you assume Moore starting and then you assume AZ, Brown-Lee, and Brandon Stevens, maybe 4/5 of your secondary is okay. You need to add a safety here. So that kind of brings us into our needs and questions. I have quarterback. They obviously need, even if it's just somebody to compete with Justin Fields, whether they take someone at number 2, that will obviously be interesting. Running back, they have a need. Wide receiver, they have a big need. Left guard, edge rusher, interior defensive line, linebacker, and safety. So I have a lot of needs for the New York Jets. I think that another reason, if you're the Jets and maybe you just run it back with Justin Fields, or you sign somebody to compete with Justin Fields, is that because you have all of these needs, and maybe you do trade Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald, and now your roster looks even worse on paper. Now you're, like I said, if you trade those guys, Harrison Phillips is starting, Jamie and Sherwood is starting, and like I said, 4/5 of your secondary, so that's 6 guys, but Stevens isn't a long-term piece, and you have no idea what you have in really any of the other 3, considering Moore is like the most optimistic rookie, but he was a mid to late round guy. So they have a lot of needs. They need some wide receivers, multiple. They need, running back. They need a lot of pieces here. Are they one of those teams that says, hey, we have Aaron Glenn has shown us nothing. We need a quarterback significantly. They keep talking. I know everyone says, the next year's class is so much better, and they always say that. And then it turns out to, this year was supposed to be the great year for quarterbacks, and then none of those guys turned out to be great. And so next year is going to actually be the year where it's great. But are the Jets one of those teams where you look at them and say, I don't even know if after this offseason they can, maybe they're going to be right back in the top 5 again. especially if they run it back with Aaron Glenn and Justin Fields, which they already chose to run it back with Glenn, and they already are paying Fields $20-something million. So that's a serious question: is do they just like go cheap at quarterback and then decide, to try to swing big next year at quarterback? So then some of my other questions: do they bring back either of the free agent guards? I think Vera Tucker is a firm no. I lean no on John Simpson. Do they give up on both the first round edge rushers? I think they try and trade both of them this summer. I'll be real interested to come back in the draft and see if both edges are on a different team. How do they acquire running back or improve running back? Do they just lean on Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, the two backups, or do they actually do something? I don't even think it's a question of is Breece Hall coming back. Do they let the safeties and Quincy Williams walk? I think the answer to that is yes. Tony Adams, Andre Cisco, Quincy Williams. I think those are all free agents. And then what do they think about Adonai Mitchell? And do they want to bring back John Mechie? I think Mitchell is going to be in the mix because it's going to be hard for them to add a lot of receivers. I don't know if Mechie will be. So that's where I stand on the New York Jets. It'll be interesting to see, like I said, what they do, especially that big swing at quarterback. Do they make it or not? And then do they kind of just spend the offseason tinkering all those other holes and then maybe come back next year with a big swing? So we will talk to you guys. We got the Arizona Cardinals here picking number 3 tomorrow. So we'll talk to you then. Leave any comments if you like the format, if you have any other questions. If you are a Jets fan and hate the way I talked about them, let me know. So we'll talk to you guys soon.